If you will, turn back in your Bibles to the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, chapter 19. If you don't have your Bibles, it's okay. We furnish our text and our outline in your bulletin, and you will have the reading on the screen. We want to welcome all of our visitors out today, whoever you are. We will not call you out. We will exercise some anonymity for you, but we're glad to have you with us. We will be having the Lord's table after the preaching and a time of prayer, and you are welcome to join us if you are a believer in Christ. If you are not, please restrain. Proverbs 21, verse 12, if you will, it's going to be a launching point for our consideration in the book of the Revelation, where Solomon makes an observation about a privilege that the wise person has. He says in Proverbs 21, verse 12, please, these words: "The righteous man wisely considers the house of the wicked, but God overthrows it for its wickedness." Anyway, the wise man wisely considers the house of the wicked. What that means is a wise person does not neglect or disregard the condition of his neighbor who happens to be ignorant of or in opposition to God. And the wise person does not minimize or relegates to insignificance or unworthiness the attention that he should or they should pay towards the lot of the wicked. Wickedness in the scriptures really simply means the person or the people or the attitude that has departed from the straight and the narrow way. And what Solomon teaches us and what the Word of God tells us here is that the believer who stands righteous in Jesus Christ is made wise unto salvation because he or she absolutely regards everything in light of the counsel of God. They do not neglect the house of the wicked as insignificant or unworthy of their attention, because the lot and portion of the wicked, their way of thinking and their methods of accomplishments are predictable. They are selfish and they are godless. The idea here of wisely considering is the term that means to analyze and to critique, to evaluate and prosper in doing so. This is a very prominent term here, this adjective, wisely consider. It means that the godly are known for observing the ways of men, that they are not inconsiderate or cold-hearted or indifferent to the way humanity works. The godly person is very much interested in how men and women think and how they function and how they build and formulate their ideas. The godly are concerned about what happens when a group of people or a society or a nation begins to adopt measures and engage in policies and erect ideas and worldviews contrary to God. So the wise man is always observing to watch, now listen to this, how God responds to a society of people who overtly reject his will, his law, his decrees, his precepts, his mandates. The believer is extremely concerned to see how God responds to his own word relative to how men and women behave. I'm highly interested in how God will respond when the wicked, in a high-handed, open evaluation and assertion that we will not have God to rule over us. I'm watching to see how God will respond. I'm concerned with how God will react to the behavior of his creatures. Because you see, God has already laid out in his word, it will not go ill. It will not go well with the wicked. What he says in the Bible is that he knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly will perish. What God tells us is that it does not profit a man to gain the whole world, and particularly if he gains the whole world by ill-gotten gain. What God's word tells me is that if a man acquires wealth and privilege and power and position, that's what the term house means. We highly regard the estate, the resources, the acquisition of the wicked. We highly regard their position and their status, their power and their authority. We highly regard how they acquired it. And then we highly regard what will be the end thereof. We highly regard that the content and essence of what they have has come in a way that does not honor God. And for the believer, that matters. You know, we all are always struggling with possessing things. That's a natural, endemic tendency on all of us. We struggle with the same thing that the world struggles with, right? We want to have a sound economic situation. We want to have a roof over our head. We want to be able to pay our bills. We want to be able to live with a little bit of freedom, room to move about and get about and do what we want to do. And we try as hard as we can to do it the right way. Then we watch our neighbor. We watch our neighbor getting about the business through the back door, around the corner, underneath the table, digging holes in the ground, plowing through. And then we watch them prosper in it. We watched them rise to great estates. We watched them make more money than they could have ever imagined. We recognize that there is a kind of prosperity to the life and ways and conduct of the wicked. But as we keep watching, we have an opportunity to make the right assessment, and that's this. The wicked still will perish in their way. The wicked still will collapse up under, watch this now, all of that prosperity that they appear to possess, because what they possess is not true. What the righteous come to discover is what we're seeing by which might be called the luxury and the opulence and the material acquisition of the wealthy. Watch this now, is a lie. What the righteous come to discover by analyzing and critiquing and evaluating and judging righteously is that what they have before us is nothing but a mirage. It's a deception. It's an illusion of power. It's an illusion of wealth. It's an illusion of standing. It's an illusion of grandeur. It's only an illusion. Now, in order to make that kind of assessment, God has to give you wisdom. He has to help you to understand the latter end of the wicked. And in so doing, keep you and I from falling prey to pursuing that same false vision. And that's where we are today in our text. And when I say that we are in this, what I call privileged but precarious place, we're at Revelation chapter 18. And we're in this privileged and precarious place in the text. If you're new visiting with us, here's how I would help you situate yourself. You have the privilege of observing God testify to the end of all wickedness, whether it's individuals or whether it's governments or whether it's nations. And there are a group of people who are in a position right now to watch it all come down. To watch it all come down. And I don't want to revisit much of what we talked about last week, but for you and I to actually successfully escape the condemnation of the world, we've got to see it coming down before it comes down. God has to give you the wisdom to recognize when your society is already devaluating itself. When your society is already disintegrating. You and I have to have wisdom before the collapse, to see the collapse before the collapse. Now, in economics, men are looking for that all the time. We're looking for all of the signals, all of the graphs, all of the peaks, all of the measures and metrics, are we not, for the next crash? And then we try to adjust ourselves relative to what we anticipate because of pathologies and behaviors in the market. It's the same way in the spiritual dimension. The believer has to be highly interested in God's economy. His economia. We have to understand the stewardship of the kingdom of God. And then what we do is we recognize when we see the crumbling of the Babylonian system, it's our right and privilege to position ourselves so as not to be taken out with it. This is why we worship God. This is why we sit under the preaching and teaching of the word of God. This is why we depend fully upon the Spirit of the living God to give us understanding. This is why the psalmist said, open my eyes that I may behold wonderful things out of your law. And we argued last week that in order to see the Babylonian system coming down, Christ must reveal his glory to your heart so that you live on a higher plane than this world system. And operating on a higher plane, you have the security of seeing the system come down without you coming down with it. And that's where we are in our context. And I do want to assert in our text, it depicts for us, again, the precarious privilege of the called out ones to wisely observe the destruction of the whore city. That's what we're dealing with, are we not? The whore city. Chapter 6:17 was the depiction of the whore. Chapter 18 is the city. The whore city is coming down, and what you and I are going to do is walk through the calamity. Vision yourself, picture yourself having heard the alarm of that precious city that you loved, and you realize that the enemy is coming, or already hurling missiles at the city you love, and you have the privilege to escape it, but you barely escape, you narrowly escape. You are on an island just several miles away from the city that's being destroyed, and you get to watch every aspect of that city pummeled and devastated by an enemy greater than them. And you actually had an investment in that city. Are you not going to be troubled emotionally? Are you not going to struggle with the fact that you are looking at certain levels of your own interests coming down? This is what I mean by precarious. We're privileged in that if your eyes are open, you can see it coming down. It's precarious in that, as we're about to see, the struggle of the believers that we have way too much of Babylon in us as well. And so it challenges us relative to its coming down, because it also means that there's certain levels of vain hope in us that have to come down too. And so let's work through the text, because I'm going to show you, if you have time for me, how this actually justifies itself in the unpacking of four concepts. And we started with this last week. This is point number 2 from last week, but it's point number 1 in your outline. The cry of their calamity. The cry of their calamity. Chapter 18, verse 2 and 3 tells us this in Revelation. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partaker of her sins, that you not receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her, even as she rewarded you, and double unto her according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. What you are actually hearing is a description of the total demolition of a kingdom that lived in open, pompous rebellion against God, but is now collapsing. Language would evade you who are 21st century people. Language would evade you who are millennials or Gen X's or Gen Zers or whatever you are. The language would evade you because this would be archaic terminology about the value systems of the first century culture. The language would evade you because it's using the metaphor of a sensual pleasure engaged in a whoremonger with a whore, and then comes to discover that that pleasure is abruptly broken by a violent intrusion into the relationship. And then all of a sudden, the whore whom that whoremonger enjoyed is now devastated before him, and he's alarmed and drawn back now to actually prophesy the very destruction of the one with whom he engaged either surreptitiously or openly with. Do you understand what I just stated? He is now having to admit that he had bought into a lie. He's having to actually now confess that what he thought was an acceptable pleasure was nothing but a demonic delusion, a temporary pleasure that has horrible, horrible outcomes to it. And this is something that you and I want to be thinking through too, as well as the people of God. This is the way God detours his saints from completely being trapped by the whore. I love the way that Ravi Zacharias put it. The late Ravi Zacharias, as you guys know, he passed away. He was frequently laying out different arguments for what we would call civil apologetics. And he would talk about the propensity of human beings when we have lost our moral compass to be gripped by pleasures that were nothing more than lies and delusions. He said that the man or the woman or the people who have lost their moral compass are gripped by the perversion of pleasures that should be directed towards good things, but are now actually preoccupied with illusory and perverse and twisted images. He used the example of a man who had been walking the shores of a river or a sea bank, and he came upon a woman who was bathing, and she was some ways down the road, and he saw the silhouette of her body, and he began to lust after her, and he stood there and he engaged in all sorts of fanciful fantasy about her. Now, mind you, it's all in his head, because he's far from her, but see, his mind is trapped because he has no moral compass. He has no capacity to see it for what it is, because he's gripped by intrinsic self-deception and morbid pleasures of things that are not right. Do you understand what I just stated? And as he continued walking towards her, what he discovered as he got closer to her was a reality that he was never prepared for. As he got closer, he got gripped by the radical change of the image of the woman that he had saw. What was the change? It was the change from a lie in his own head, the delusion of his own optical expectation. Because as he drew closer to her, he discovered that he was watching a leper bathing. And as he got closer and closer, he saw the grotesque deformity of her body. And as he got closer, it became much more obnoxious to him that what he was seeing in true was something that was unclean, something that had been plagued by disease. And she wasn't waving to him to come, she was waving to him to go. Don't come near me. But in his delusion, he thought he was seeing beauty. And I'm telling you, that's the way men and women are in this world system. They are being drawn by the delusion of their own mind when this world system is unclean and plagued by disease. And the Spirit of God is saying, do not touch her. Do not touch her. And yet men are drawing near her every day. And we cry out as preachers of the Word of God and as men who proclaim the gospel of the glory of God in Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, you were made for more than that. You were made for more than lies. You were made for more than the paltry images that are cast out at you by the media. The distortions and, if you will, the spray paint and all of the makeup that makes that harlot look good. She is a wretched whore, filled with disease. Filled with disease. And if the believer isn't careful, he'll be trapped. And so our first point says their calamity, and I'm only going to revisit shallowly our subpoints. A repeat of the awful fall of the Babylonian system. If no one would have understood this text, guess who would have understood it? The first century church to whom Christ is writing in chapter 2 and 3. The legacy of the people of God is that they were frequently captured by pagan nations. Babylon being the first, as you know, prominently. But before Babylon was Assyria. And before Assyria was Egypt, and I'm going to touch on that. And they would have known what it is meant to be now in a world that does not hold to your worldview, but has all of the accolades of power, prestige, even religion, to which if they wanted to switch from their original theses and their original identity, they could adopt the policies of the world and begin to engage in trade and commerce and enjoy the society that was before them, which is what happened to national Israel over and over again. What God would say is, come out of her, my people, but they would not come out. Or if they came out in the flesh, they didn't come out in the spirit. So they were contaminated by their involvement in the world system. And the first century church would have been extremely clear and vividly aware that what's being described in Revelation 18:2 and 3 was national Israel's utter involvement in the pagan world system, in trade and commerce, in goods and wares, in, watch this now, traditions and values, even in religious syncretism. Follow this. They were only Christian in name, but not in conduct. They were Christian in name, but they were Babylonian in conduct. They wore the Babylonian garment. They put on the Babylonian perfume. They engaged in the Babylonian affairs. They even engaged in the politics of the Babylonian system. And for sure, we've already learned it, have we not, that they were deeply entrenched in the mystical prognostication of sorcery among the Babylonians. In other words, they were pretending that they loved Jehovah. And what God is saying to Israel at that time was, hey, this thing that you are loving is falling right before your eyes, and you need to know it. And we saw this, it gripped us specifically in the book of Isaiah, chapter 21, 6-9, where Isaiah plainly said, as the watchman was on the wall, two guys are traveling by, and they say, hey, watchman, you may not have heard the news. Babylon is fallen. The watchmen's in Jerusalem, there are people in Jerusalem, they are all living ignorant and naive about the fact that the Babylonian system was collapsing. They are all under the assumption that who can make war with Babylon? It's kind of what you hear about America and the tension of, on the one hand, you got people who so hate America that they need to really turn in their passport and go to another country. On the other hand, you got people so wrapped up in the flag that America can do no wrong, and that she's the best thing since sliced bread, and that Babylon won't fall. And I don't particularly care for either of the extremes. I'm only concerned about God's interpretation. And what I do know is that it very much appears like there is a radical falling taking place in my country. That's very clear to me. And so what we see here is a repeat of the fall. This is Revelation chapter 14, verse 8. Just to quote it for those of you who are not with us, the people who are reading the apocalypse have heard this language already before. The angel flying in the midst of heaven. What do they say? The Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So she's falling already in chapter 14. In chapter 18, it's coming to fruition. So here's the thing that you and I have to know. God will warn us about the collapse of a kingdom, about the demise of a nation, about him taking down any group of people, any society that would raise its head up against the true and the living God. All believers know this. The crown does not endure forever. All true believers know this, that God will judge both the righteous and the wicked. Do you know that? Do you know that even if our rulers were saved folk, if they departed from the Lord, God will still judge them? Do you know that? If you don't, then you haven't been reading your Bible. National Israel is a perfect example of that. Because of David's rebellion, because of Solomon's rebellion, the kingdom was divided. And then there are several of the other godly Judite kings who also fell into and assimilated into compromise, and God brought judgment. Please understand that judgment is not abated because there are Christian men and women in politics. If they don't live out their Christianity and sell their soul to make sure that the policies of the country correspond to the word of God, they are actually more culpable than the wicked. He who knew his master's will be beat with more stripes than the one that did not know the master's will. So there is no guarantee of some kind of pardon, if you will, just because you know Jesus. Jesus will whoop your tail. That's my interpretation. He will whoop your tail, and you and I have to know that is the case. All whom the Lord loves, he what? He will chasten us as a people. And so we see a repeat of the awful fault. And I want you to mark what God says here. He says, it's because she made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. I said this before, and for those of you who are new, what you're in on in this dialogue, in this conversation, in this monologue, our triad of narrative from God to his people to us is this, that God has a controversy with two groups of people in the context. He has a controversy with national Israel because it apostated from God. And he has a controversy with the Roman Empire that does not know how to give God glory for putting it in power. Both the apostate nation of Israel and the Roman Empire now are under the judgment of God. And here's the particular reason why God is now judging Rome and judging Israel is because they have gotten in cahoots with one another. So you can make application right away to my own nation. I'm not going to keep you here that long. But when you fail to understand boundaries and you fail to understand constitutional grounds for your own unique identity in relationship to the rest of the world, and you open yourself up to policies and relationships with other parts of the world so as to sell your own people out, then you open yourself up to a kind of whoredom which would merit the wrath of God. You can be sure of that. God deals with nations and churches. And this is where we are. And here's what God says. She has made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is God's particular indictment. The she here is the whore, Revelation 17, and that is apostate Israel. What did Israel do? On a geographical level, just to help some of you get it, it was positioned between Egypt, Babylon, Asia Minor, and the Roman Empire, heading all the way up to England through France and Italy. Israel was a central society for which all of the merchants all around the world would use as a thoroughfare to pass into all the other nations. Now watch this. Just imagine your house being the house with all doors by which other foreign nations could pass through. You get to see their goods, they get to see your goods. Do you know how much discipline it takes for you to make sure you maintain your identity when all of the goods and wares and stock and resources of Egypt are passing through your house? Babylon passing through your house, Medo-Persia passing through your house, Africa passing through your house, Italy passing through your house, Rome passing. You get to see all of these beautiful and exquisite works and artifacts and riches and wealth of those other countries. See, I'd be taken out. I'm sorry. I'd be just taken straight out. And I know you would too, because you are the product of American culture. We'd be taken out. I would need God to have to blind me and make me deaf so I couldn't see or hear, because I'm not better than Solomon. And Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and he was the center of this thoroughfare that I'm talking about. They were all attracted to Solomon because of his wisdom. And they all came, and they all brought their wares and all their goods and all their riches just for a word from Solomon. And when they left Solomon, as the proverb says, Verily, all men will praise you when you do well to yourself. And it makes it very clear a man's gift will make room for him. And it makes it very clear whatsoever a man shall sow, that shall he also reap. And we've already been learning when God blesses you, he gives you qualities and gifts and resources to bless others. And that blessing comes back in return. Solomon was heaped upon by all the nations because he could answer the riddles. He could break through the conundrums. He could explain the mysteries. And he also had something to show because the temple was a major, major wonder of the world at that time. And people came, and the next thing you know, first he only had one wife, then 2, then 5, then 7. Now see, had he stopped at 20, I would have said, cool, Solomon. You got time for me? Because his dad stopped at 20. Now God said 1. You see how bad we are? God said 1. David had 20. Solomon said, now my daddy had 20. And when I look back at his life, I think 20 is just not enough. 700 wives. 300 concubines, 1,000 women. We did the numbers 15 years ago. He couldn't hang out but with one wife for a couple of weeks at a time to cover his whole ministry. Do you understand that? All right, just to help some of you ladies that's getting pretty mad at your husbands right now, watch this. Most of it was business. This is what you do when you are a wealthy magistrate. These affinities were all about business. But don't you fool yourself. The Confessions of the King, called Ecclesiastes, Solomon tapped into some of that. And because he did, he fell seriously. And he became a model for all of us individually, as local churches, and as a country who would tell the world that our basis for existence is one true and living God, inalienable rights given to us by our Maker that constitutes our freedoms and right to pursue happiness based on the grounds of virtue. See, when you and I become porous and open to the influences of the secular world, we're no better than Solomon. I'm just telling you, we're no better than Solomon. So we have to examine ourselves when we think and look objectively at what's going on around our world. And at least we have to say this. If it wasn't for the grace of God, there go I. But as we are working through the text, I want you to see our subpoint B, a wretched revelation. This is what is stated in Revelation 18:2. All I want you to take away from here is this. When God describes the fall of Babylon, he describes the fall of Babylon, which is the whore, the apostate Judites, and the Roman Empire. They are all Babylon, okay? They're both Babylon. Remember, he who joins himself to a harlot becomes one with the harlot. The harlot and the whoremonger are one, right? And so God is making Israel out to be a Neo-Babylon, just like he's making Rome out to be a Neo-Babylon, because the twain have become what? One flesh. Y'all got that? So now what he says is, whereas they looked like the envy of the world, now they have fallen. And look at the transformation. Look how starkly different they are now from what they were. They have become the habitation of devils. Here's what God does. He pulls the curtains back so you can see Babylon and the apostate church for what it is behind the scenes. Do you see it? See, now if you have those filtered glasses that are rooted in the corruption that we talked about that fella earlier who thought he could be drawn to this beautiful naked woman that was going to give him some. Remember that? He was deceived, wasn't he? And what I'm saying to you is this world system will deceive you if God doesn't pull the curtains back and let you see it for what it is. You and I can only walk in liberty where we have the truth. If I'm affected by a lie, then my reality is distorted. And can I help you, child of God? Because you are a child of God, you have the spirit of truth in you. You also have the word of truth in you. That means you have the Son of truth in you, because God is true and not a liar. And his goal is to constantly bring you into contact with the truth. That means he'll go to war against your own idols and facades and distortions, will he not? That's because he loves you. And what I need God to do for me and what you need for him to do is to pull back the curtains whenever those precarious actors are coming on the stage and perpetrating a fraud to draw you in. Lord, pull back the curtains and let me see her or him or it for what it really is. Because I don't like demons. Do you like demons? Now, if you could see the demon in every one of our wicked, crooked politicians, you'd never buy into the lie. But what we do know is that the power of Satan is working in our secular system as well as in our religious system. And he puts on a form of godliness that he will cause men and women to see him differently than he is. But you know the truth. And because you know the truth, you have the precarious privilege of recognizing Babylon's fall and not falling prey to it. Am I making some sense? I'm trying to drive home a point. Because the benefit of the believer is that the Spirit of God constantly lets you know something ain't right. You can't ignore that warning. He didn't make you to ignore the warning of the spirit of error. He meant for you to sit still and to know that he is God and to wait for God to give you clarity, give you revelation so you can walk in the truth. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Yeah, you and I are going to have to learn how to fight a good warfare. Habitation of devils, and then the whole of every foul spirit. You guys see that? Yeah, if I were actually working with some of my Pentecostal brethren 10, 20 years ago, what they would say is, that spirit stinks. You can smell him. That's not true. You're violating categories. You can't smell a demon. I'm just helping you, okay? But they used to say it all the time, a foul spirit. You can smell him, smell like the pit of hell. I have no idea what the pit of hell smells like. I have absolutely no idea what the pit of hell smells like. I don't think you either. So be careful about this kind of mystical, Gnostic junk that you get from Pentecostalism because they don't think clearly. We're talking spiritual categories here. Foul means unclean. Foul means obnoxious to the Spirit. Foul means abhorrent and detestable to God. And that's all that matters to me. If it's abhorrent to God, then it's got to be abhorrent to me. Even if my natural man likes it. And every cage of a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And we saw the specific language that corresponded to that very vividly in the book of Isaiah. And so it's important for us to, Lord, let me see reality whenever someone is trying to affect a vision or a narrative or an interpretation. Help me to see through it. That's called discernment, by the way. Help me to see through it. Now, we are at subpoint C, which is really interesting. I call this a redemptive what? So underneath the cry of a calamity, we have the awful fall. We have the revelation of this wretched whore that you would see in Isaiah chapter 21 and Isaiah chapter 13 too. But we have also, in the midst of a fall, something really interesting occurs. And I want to show you, this is what I labored up front about. This is Isaiah chapter 51, and I want you to start at verse 9. Isaiah 51. Verse 9. In fact, yeah, we can start here. And I want you to watch something. Sorry, it's not Isaiah, it's Jeremiah. Jeremiah 51, verse 9. I want you to watch something here, and we're going to make application. So you heard Babylon coming down. You've been told that a couple of hundred years earlier. Now all of a sudden, Babylon's coming down. All around you. It's imminent. And in terms of proximity, it's so close to you that you're compelled to act. This is no longer a theory. This is one of the challenges we have in our country. We have prospered so magnificently on so many levels that much of our Christianity is theory. Very little of our Christianity challenges us to behave in the interest of our soul. Much of our Christianity can be carefully and tightly fit within our presuppositional systems and our theological arguments, but we live life just like everybody else. Very seldom does our Christianity mandate a cross experience, unless it comes from without. We're not doing it ourselves. We too heavily leaning into the prosperity of being an American. This is where I've told us at Grace, most Christians in America are more prosperity-oriented Christians in the Pentecostal sense than they are cross-centered Christians. Very seldom do we wake up with Jesus being the absolute central priority of our life. I'm just telling the truth. Can I tell the truth today? We're getting ready to eat the table. Can we tell the truth for just 5 minutes? After that, we can go back to lying, okay? But can I just tell the truth for a minute? Listen, the precarious standing that we have is that we are also ourselves way too prosperous for the practical, Christocentric, suffering-oriented elements of the gospel to have benefit in our world. I'm just telling you now. That's the nature of prosperity. That's the danger of prosperity. And in that sense, child of God, for God to bring our situation down a status or two is good for us. Yeah. For God to bring our status down a notch or two in terms of, you might lose your job, or you may get laid off, or you may get sick. All kinds of things can happen that brings you and I into a strait, right? Then all of a sudden, our value system that we did not articulate vocally, which was part of our everyday ethic, now is brought into question, and we're hurrying up and running to the throne. Remember that? Now you're running to the throne. I love you, Lord. I want to spend time with you, Lord. Where's my Bible at? I haven't read it in weeks. Let me find my Bible. And then you find your Bible and start reading, and you forgot where you were the last time because it was 8 months ago. That's what God has to do to wake you up to your identity. And this is why I've said so many times this COVID thing has been a blessing for many people. Because we are not rooted and grounded like we say we are. We see the tossing to and fro. But see, if I were to be prophetic with you and pastoral, what's happening in our text, that's unfolding in our text, is only a little bit away from us on a practical level. So what you and I get to do is look in the rear view mirror or the side view mirrors, and we can see it coming. Are you hearing me? It's not here yet, but we can see it coming. So we thank God for his word, because where there is no vision, the people perish. And so we can look into God's word, and we can read his law, and we can comprehend prophecy, and we can see that which has been will also be again. There's nothing new under the sun. Here it comes. We just don't know exactly how close it is, but I'm glad to be looking at it. So here's what the text says. Let's watch this. It says, go back to verse 7, please, 51 verse 7, because I want to come to verse 9 and show you some. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand. She's called the golden city. You guys remember that head of gold, right? At the pinnacle of the national glory that made all the earth what? Drunk. You see the correlation between Revelation chapter 18 and Jeremiah 5:51? Here again, she made all the nations to drink. What does that mean? She sent her wares, her money, her resources into all the countries of the world, and she, by policy, hook and crook, or by military, hint, hint, brought them into a league with her. All right. That's what whore nations do. This is where we are in the tech world right now, whether you know it or not. The tech world is doing that with its Leviathan hands everywhere, grabbing a hold of everybody, bringing them into the great harlotry system. Right where they are, right in their homes, right on their computers, right on their phones, and one day, right in their heads. That's the next stage we're moving to. You got time for me? That's the next stage we're moving to. This is not hard to see. This is not hard to see. But I want to show you what it looks like for the people of God to deal with the fall of Babylon. And I'm praying that it's not us. This is my prayer. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth to drink. The nations have drunken of her wine. Therefore, the nations are what? Boy, if that's not a good interpretation, I love that. So what happens when you engage in secularism, what happens when you engage in materialism, is you lose your mind. If you just raise that category up, raise that particular category up in your purview. Are not people today irrational? Even our politicians, even our leaders. I'm going to put up another little caveat here just for those of you who don't mind listening to me teach and preach. I struggled with this last week. Here's what I struggle with. Not because I don't understand it. I struggle with it because this is what I have to say now. You can't trust the intellectual. You can't trust people who understand laws of logic, coherent arguments, and are able to assess material things accurately and correctly, which is to our benefit because there are tiers to truth, levels to truth, right? There is a material truth. There is a physiological truth. I'm talking about the physics of our world. Then there is the transcendent truth of things that operate in that other world called the spiritual dimension. Material truth, right? Science that has to deal with the stoichia of this universe, how it works. We need it. Then there is the physiological truth that deals with what's going on behind the science. You guys understand what I'm saying? Science is the reason why we've got chairs and buildings and lights that work. But just because you are a PhD in physics, metaphysics, profound physics, or higher math does not mean you have the integrity to follow the logic through and recognize that there is one true and living God who is the cause of everything. And that God has revealed himself to you in a way that makes it inevitable when you look at the science data that everything is falling apart according to the science data. And the only answer to the science data and the corruption of our society is the intervention of God. Einstein knew this. Let me close out this narrative. This is what I mean. The secular world knows a lot about a lot of things. And this is how they acquired positions of power. They become judges, and they become lawyers, and they become senators, and they become governors, and they become the men of renown. And then all of a sudden they're faced with a truth that's so obvious. And they collapse right in front of us as if they didn't even have a third grade education. So here it is. Watch this, saints. Intellectual knowledge is not safe. What you and I need is a conviction of the truth, so that whatever capacity of knowledge you acquire, it has the integrity of hanging on to what's right, so that you don't betray that knowledge by an interest that's rooted in your own self-preservation. In other words, the Christian is not an intellectual. The Christian is a man or woman that's driven by truth, under the conviction of truth. And when I hear the truth, I'm obligated to stand on the truth, no matter what, no matter me. I don't get to wiggle my way out because I am the Attorney General or the Secretary of State. I don't get to wiggle my way out. If I'm a man of God, I'm obligated to let the truth penetrate until it hits rock bottom, and all of the consequences of that truth have to fall out, because we know that truth is what liberates us. What we're dealing with in our generation are men and women who don't have the integrity of letting the truth speak for itself. If we could just let the truth speak, a lot of this stuff could be straightened out. Do you hear me? So he says that the nations have drunk of the wine of her fornication and have become mad. I get it. Verse 7, verse 8. Babylon is suddenly what? Suddenly fallen, and what? Do you believe that? Right. I mean, what we believe is the proposition. It's a prophecy. We talked about it last week. God can prophesy a thing that's 1,000 years down the line, because God is omniscient. God doesn't operate on linear time. He sees the end from the beginning. If God tells you Babylon is fallen and destroyed, are you ready? There's no hope for Babylon once the reality begins to manifest itself. Does that make sense? Now watch this though. Watch this though. So this word came to the people of God. God had told the people of God, Babylon is fallen, and Babylon is what? Now, if they were to follow the logic of that prophecy, they would have just been packing their bags, ready to get on the next train. I'm sorry, I'm being anachronistic now. The next train out of Babylon. Babylon fallen and destroyed? Did God say that? Man, I'm out of here. Right? I mean, because who can fight against the Lord? God has spoken it. It's going to come to pass. He's decreed it, right? Will he not fulfill it? That's how God talks, right? He speaks those things that are not as if they were, right? He brings to pass all of his will. Not one of his precepts will ever fail. We know that. So then what's going on here in verse 8? Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. And how for her? Do you see that? That's what we're supposed to be doing in Revelation 18. That's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the chapter. Because that's what men and women are doing there, howling. Do you see that? But see, the how means that you actually have a proper intellectual, cognitive, and emotional awareness of what's happening. You howl because you see the woeful judgment coming down on the society, and the appropriate response is howling. It's certainly not partying. It's certainly not shouting. But something really weird happens right here. Will you notice it? What I read this 2-3 weeks ago. I said, wait a minute. Babylon coming down. God said it's destroyed. He tells me to howl for her. And then the next line I hear, watch this now. Take balm for her pain. If so be she may be healed. Do you see that? Take balm for her pain. If so, she may be healed. So right now, God is actually challenging everyone on the immutability of his counsel. Please understand, this is not an imperative. This is a conditional statement to expose us as to whether or not we actually believe the prophecy that just came beforehand. Do you hear me? Now, what he wants to do is prove to you the immutability of his counsel, meaning try to heal her. Utilize all of your sorceries and all of your skill sets and all of your medicines and everything you have to try to heal her. Try to heal her. Do you see it? Watch verse 9. This is what it's going to say. Here it is. We would have healed Babylon. Do you see it? But she's not healed. Now, this is so interesting. The narrative is the voice of the people responding back to God. Do you think God knows us? Right, now watch this. This is what I was saying earlier. There's too much Babylonianism in our hearts. The very people who should have been ready to pack their bags when the prophecy was given that 70 years will be determined, and after the 70 years, my people shall be called out of Babylon. By the time the 70 years was up, they were so permeated with the policies and the culture and the traditions and the enormous blessings of Babylon that they had sympathy for God's enemy. They were engaged in such interest in Babylon that they didn't want Babylon to fall. They would have rather healed Babylon. And here's the way the interpreters lay it out. So I'm going to give you two sides of the coin. The interpreters lay it out that those who are called to heal Babylon would be the preachers, would be the prophets, would be the ones that would go to Babylon and tell the Babylonian leaders. Watch this, because this is what Daniel did in Daniel chapter 3, 26 through 28. Neb, the dream that you asked me to interpret falls out like this. You're going to act such a fool that you're going to dare to tell the universe that you are the one that created all this glory in Babylon. Now, here's what Daniel says. Now, let me help you, Neb. Cut off your sins in righteousness. Maybe God will extend your sanity. You guys got that? Cut off your sins in righteousness. Maybe you won't go mad. Cut off your sins in righteousness. Maybe you won't go. In fact, that's really what we do when we preach the gospel, do we not? We are giving men and women the healing balm of Christ that they might not go insane. Or that if they are partially insane, as many of them are today, we want them to recover from their insanity. That's where I'm at. Because there are so many people that I thought were sane that are showing themselves not sane, that I'm praying, Lord, maybe the gospel really didn't take root in them. Maybe they did not hear of the superlative perfections of Christ so as to operate out of his identity alone. Why is it that they are trapped in this Babylonian system? Why have they succumbed to the false narrative? Why have they bought the lie who profess to love Jesus? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Why have they bought that lie? So yeah, Lord, can they be healed? Can the gospel do what we assumed that it had done in time past? Draw them with cords of love. Root them and ground them in Christ. Illuminate their minds so much that they have discernment between truth and error. But we come to discover that they don't. We come to discover that maybe intellectually they comprehend propositions of the gospel, but on a personal level, they have contradicted that within themselves. This is called a lack of integrity. Remember, the integrity of the upright shall do what? But the perverseness of the wicked shall do what? Destroy them. Isn't that what God said? See, the thing about the gospel is it's calling you and I to integrity. It's calling us to integrity. Any of us can be hypocrites. And any of us can practice hypocrisy, but see, once the calamity comes, if you and I are hypocrites in nature, the calamity is going to take us away. And so here's this little window in my own heart and mind where I'm going, may it be, Lord, that you can help some of these people cut off their sins in righteousness. May it be that they can have a stay of judgment. Don't give them over to madness. Because here's what's going on in our world and in the Word of God. This is what happens when God wrestles with men and women and with nations. First of all, he gives them up to idolatry. That's Romans 1:21 through 24. And then he gives them up to immorality, because idolatry means that you have a false God, which means your moral standard, your ethical breaks now are flawed and perverted. So to whom you look to, you become. And if our world is operating out of an idolatrous system, well, quite naturally, that idolatry system is going to conform it to the world system. Am I making sense? Now, all of a sudden, our policies are immoral. Why? Because we don't have a God to look to who gives us the standard of the Imago Dei that we might walk in. And there's one more collapse coming. Idolatry leads to immorality. Immorality leads to reprobation. Reprobation is the absolute loss of a capacity to comprehend truth to the saving of your soul. Reprobation is the absolute loss of comprehending truth to the salvation of your soul. It is the disconnection of the mind to be able to respond to an alarm or a warning and do the right thing. When the conscience is seared, it no longer can respond to the warning. Are you hearing me? So what's happening in this text here, which is going to lead us to our next point, is that the so-called believers are trying to heal reprobates. Yes. Do you see it? Watch it. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Why? Because she's reprobate. Just like Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel said, Neb, cut it off. You know what the text says in that same chapter? Next thing we know, Neb walking through his house. Head as big as the blimp. Now he just heard the prophet say, cut it off. Why didn't he cut it off? Reprobation. And even his son Belshazzar was worse than him. It was Belshazzar that sat in the feast using all the utensils of God, blaspheming irreverently the true and the living God. And Daniel had to let him know, didn't you see what happened to your daddy? How is it that you have entered into this same folly? The Bible says that the prudent man sees the evil afar off and hides himself, but the wicked go on and are what? Punished. That's called reprobation. Two people hear the same thing. One people get it. One person gets it, the other person doesn't. Y'all following what I'm saying? One person gets it, the other person doesn't. This is the mystery that you and I are dealing with. Painful, but necessary to understand. You and I can't make a person get the gospel. We can't make a person understand truth. We can't make them comprehend reality. You can't do it. Only God can. But we will try to heal them until we understand. And I love this next part. Can I keep talking? Yes. He says, we would have healed Babylon, but she's not healed. Run! That's my interpretation. Run! This is really interesting because that term forsake her there is a term in the Hebrew that literally means to divorce something as if it's detestable. Do you hear me? That's the idea of breaking a relationship with someone because you find in them something unclean. Right? This is the idea of a man leaving his mother and a father, that's the term, and cleaving to his wife. Now, watch this now. I want you to see the analogy. There are two ideas with which this term forsake means and functions. It functions as recognizing now the thing that you were trying to cleave to is obnoxious. The second thing that this means is you recognize now that you have to run and escape for your life. Do you see it? So can you see in the context, in the moment of the crisis where the professing believers of Israel are divided in their hearts in terms of their allegiance, and they're trying to prop up Babylon, trying to save it. And then they come to the revelation that Babylon doesn't even want to be saved. Now all of a sudden they're realizing the clock is even more narrow. All right, run. Save yourselves from this untoward generation is the way Peter, James, and John puts it in the book of Acts, because the Jewish people had 37 years to hear the gospel before the calamity came. Y'all walking with me? Y'all understanding what I'm saying? So the book of Acts is really warning the Jews to run from Judaism and run to Christ, because the temple is coming down. The city is coming down. Their high priest is coming down. Their leaders are all coming down. They're all collapsing because they're all reprobate. They were all entering into the third stage. They had already committed idolatry. They had already become immoral. Read your Bible. That's how Christ preached to them in Matthew 23. Woe, 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 woe unto you, you hypocrites. And he lays out them being a what? A perverse and adulterous generation that seeks a sign and a wonder. He had laid it out. See, Jesus already saw them as a cage filled with every foul bird and dominated by demons. Are you guys with me? I'll give you one more application to that. Jesus said it in Matthew chapter 12. He's going around preaching the gospel. He's actually healing Israel. He's going around preaching the gospel. He's actually healing Israel. He's healing men and women from every city. Some cities he goes into Texas and he healed every one of them. Jesus is actually purging Israel as the great Melchizedekian high priest he is on a typological level. Do you guys get that? He's purging it. They're hearing the word of God for the first time. The rest of the leaders there, they were wrapped up in the Talmud and the rabbinical writings. They had already abandoned the word of God. Now people are hearing a fresh scripture teaching who Jesus is. And they're being drawn. And devils are being cast out. And souls are being healed. And men and women are being fed spiritual food. Israel is coming under an exorcising of the demon. Jesus says, and when the house is swept and all cleaned out, but because it doesn't have an occupancy of the divine nature to fill that house, after a while, that demon that's cast out goes and gets 7 other demons and comes back, and the latter end is worse than the first. And that's what you're looking at in Revelation chapter 18. Are y'all following? Raise your hand if you're tracking with me. This is called an exegetical exposition of the text historically. So what you're looking at now is a nation given over to utter reprobation, immorality, idolatry. And God always measures. He always measures. Verse 4 of our text. I'm at verse 4. Look at what verse 4 says. God always measures. So like he's on your time clock, not his. Like he gives us time. Look at verse 4. I love this. Revelation 18, verse 5. Maybe it's verse 5. Yeah. Look at what it says. For her sins have reached unto heaven. Do you guys see that? Watch this. And God hath what? Remembered her iniquity. For time's sake, I'm just going to show you some fundamental principles here if you don't get it. The way God speaks about sin
is that you and I are sin factories. We commit sin all day, every day. And those sins are big and small. And they come intentionally and unintentionally. They are sins of commission and sins of omission. They're sins of the motive, they're sins of the mouth, and they're sins of the behavior. That's what we are by nature, sinners. Sinners. And if God were to leave us in this state of sin that we're in, what these sins do is stack up. They stack up until they reach heaven. That is an aphorism or a terminology that's used that says when a society's sins have gone so long to where they reach the throne of God in heaven, God then will act judicially. This is what we learned about the Amorites, as God told Abraham, I'm going to allow your children to be in the land 430 years. And when the iniquity of the Amorites has come to the what? Full, I will judge them and they will come out with great substance. Are you hearing me? Right. The Bible lays it out that men and women treasure up to themselves wrath. Romans chapter 2, 3 and 4. They treasure up to themselves wrath. This is really important for you to get. Because the only reason that you and I flee to Christ is that the solution to our daily sin is someone who has paid for them, so as to mitigate this increasing criminal charge against us for not thinking God's thoughts after him and not loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, because none of us do. And God has to remedy that, and his remedy is very clear for us, is it not? It's in another who becomes the ground of propitiation by which all my sins are put away. Which means, watch this now, which means the idea of God remembering becomes a profoundly equivocal issue. Watch this. God is the only one in the world that remembers perfectly everything, without distortion, without minimization or maximization. Please hear this. I'm going to share the gospel with you here. This is very important. God is the only creature in the universe that remembers everything right. He's also the only being in the universe that remembers everything right. And he's also the only being in the universe that can perfectly forget everything. Can perfectly forget everything. My God can remember and forget at the same time. And if I didn't have a God who could perfectly forget my sins, I would be in trouble. Either God wouldn't be just, or I'm on my way to hell. I'm so glad I got a God who has a sea of forgetfulness into which he can pour my sins. And listen to me, he perfectly forgets them. Now watch this. You don't. Y'all got a little more time for me? Right, now, watch this now. You don't forget sins. I don't care who you is. It's lodged in your mind. It's lodged in your emotions. It's lodged in your physical makeup. It's lodged in your DNA. It's lodged in your trauma bank. It's lodged in your subconscious. It's lodged in us. You and I will say, I forgot that. No, you didn't. It's just wait, let somebody shake you. It'll come back up. It'll come back up. Because you're not God. This is why the psychologists can manipulate, the psychiatrists can manipulate you to take you into those regressive therapies and get down into your psyche and take you back to 5 years old and talk about how your uncle raped you. And then you go, yeah, that's right, he did. That was a lie. He inserted that in there to manipulate your past. I'm going to show you something here. This is very important. Only God can perfectly remember. And only God can perfectly forgive. You will swear you saw that,
But there are way too many entities that you're not giving consideration for which your memory can be fallible. Do you hear what I just stated? They have used this technique and have put men in the electric chair. And then later on down the line, a better psychologist than him, better psychiatrist than him came along and proved that that was a distortion that was inserted into their thinking, and that individual actually put somebody to death by asserting that they had that remembrance, when in fact that remembrance was fallible. When they were able to actually discover DNA, they made it very clear that that individual that you're talking about that did that to you could not have been there. There's no DNA. In fact, there's DNA on the other hand. See, he that is first in his own cause seems just, but his neighbor comes and searches him out. I'm sharing something with you. Watch this. This is what I'm sharing with you. I'm saying that when God remembers sin, he remembers it perfectly. Like, there's no nation that's going to escape God, because God will be just when he declares their guilt, and he will be right when he exposes their sin, because he keeps a perfect record of all rebellion. Do you understand that? And the people who are blessed of the Lord to have a God that has propitiated your sins and taken all of your sins and put them on the person of his son, so that his son, Jesus Christ, becomes your propitiation. And not only ours, but for the whole world. Anyone that will come to God in Christ can find a God that can remember their sins, place them on Christ, put them away, and forget their sins forever, so that they walk free in Jesus Christ. Stay with me. Stay with me. So your battle is not with what God has done for you. Your battle is with believing what God has done for you. That's your battle. And the goal of the enemy is to detach you from believing the gospel and get you wrapped up in your own sufficiency, your own thinking. I'll tell you, child of God, if you get trapped by your own counsel, by your own might, by your own wisdom, by your own intuition, I just feel, you may be proven to be a liar. The goal of the believer, hear me now, here's how you and I are going to make it through this storm. We're going to make it through the storm by believing that God is able to forgive my sins, to pardon my sins, to put away my sins, and grace me not to see my sins either. While along with me doing that, help me to stop looking at other people's sins. This is how you destroy relationships. Families are destroyed, and communities are destroyed, and homes are destroyed when the husbands and the wives actually think too much of themselves. You know how we bring up stuff 10 years ago? That's ridiculous. It's so distorted. It's so flawed. See, there's a fundamental bias towards yourself. I have never had someone in counsel come to me and say, Pastor, I remember. And I'm going to tell you perfectly that it was all my fault. I never heard that. There is an inclination for us to make ourselves better than we are and make the other person worse than they are. It's horrible. What you are seeing here in Revelation chapter 18:5 is God having been patient with Babylon, been patient with Israel, been patient with the Roman Empire, but because they all rejected the gospel. See, the gospel has been being preached since the fall of Adam and Eve. Blood atonement, substitutionary atonement, the sacrifice of another in your behalf. Faith in God, faith in Christ has been preached to the whole world up to this hour. And men and women are rejecting it everywhere for their own knowledge, for their own wisdom, for their own remembrance. This BS that we got going on in our nation around the history of racism. There is no way you can get that right. No way you can get that right. There is no way you can get that. We already got too much hagiography going on in the writing of the books. On both sides. We whitewashing everything. Whitewashing everything. The only book you can believe is the Bible. The only truth you can hold to is the Word of God. Did y'all hear what I just stated? Every man is going to be proven to be a liar.
and God true. We need to hurry up and understand that if I'm outside of Christ, my sins are measuring up. As a nation, our sins are measuring up. And God's going to be God on that day. He's going to be God on that day. I'm going to assert one more point and close out for the time so we can partake of the Lord's table. I'm going to just enumerate these. Look with me at point number 2, the condemnation of the city. And then I'm going to deal with our last point, point number 2, and then point number 3. In our second point under verses 6 through 15, here's what I want to kind of just saturate your mind with, and then we're going to go to the close, go to the call. I want to close with the call. I want you to get the call. It's relative to where we are. Notice what it says, reward her even as she has rewarded you. Double unto her according to her works. In the cup which she has filled, fill to her double. This is justice crying out. Do you hear it? And the ones crying out are the ones who were the lambs that were slain by the whore when she destroyed them, who are called saints, in the cup that she had in Revelation 17. Remember what John says? And I marvel with great admiration because she had a cup in her hand, and in that cup was the blood of the martyrs of the saints. The blood is crying out then as it did with Abel back in the beginning. Are you guys hearing me? The blood is crying out here. Listen to it. How much has she glorified herself? Literally, that phraseology is an assessment. She has magnificently glorified herself. That is the pinnacle of her rebellion. For she should have magnificently glorified God. So this is idolatry, isn't it? Now notice what it goes on to say. And she has lived delicately. Deliciously is a term that means voluptuously, fared sumptuously, with the kind of careless, absolute, over the top excess that it was gaudy. So much torment and so much sorrow give her. Can you hear the souls of the blood crying out? So much sorrow, so much torment give her. Why? Because it's not so much that they're concerned about how she lived, but that they're concerned about the cost at which she lived like that required the death of the saints. Okay? Look, we want people to live and enjoy their lives, don't we? We want people to prosper and be blessed. That's what Solomon said. God has given us all things richly to enjoy. That's not the message here. The message here is the secular system only prospers as it destroys righteousness. Now, this is going to be the sad case scenario in the next couple of years here. And this is going to be the sad case scenario for people who don't get it. The prosperity that's about to come to the world will be at the expense of freedom and righteousness. The prosperity that's coming to this world, if you don't know it already, it's out there if you want to read. So now remember, the prudent looks well to his going. If you want to know, you can know. If you don't want to know, it's going to show up anyway. So hear me. The prosperity coming to this world on the other side of the reset is actually going to be at the expense of freedom and righteousness. Amen. Two qualities that the believer will not give up. And as a consequence, the believer will be the brunt of the suffering because the believer will be in opposition to this false prosperity. Are y'all hearing me? Right. So this is what the text is talking about. The blood is crying out because as the world seeks to prosper, it does it at the cost of truth. And the believer is a representative of the truth and at the cost of freedom. Everybody in that system are slaves. Watch it. Verse 8. Verse 8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, mourning, and famine, and she shall utterly be burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. What is that called? That is called the prohibition of the priesthood. That the high priest was not to marry a whore, but a virgin. And if that virgin he married is found out to be a whore, she was to be stoned and what? Burned. So what we see here is national Israel coming under the stoning and burning of the Toeva law in the Old Testament, because whereas she should have been a virgin, she was a harlot. You guys got that? Just helping you. Watch what verse 9 says. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her. There it is. Shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. Now look at verse 10. Standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas. That is the Hebrew Greek term. Woe, woe. There are 7 woes in Revelation 18. Notice what it says. That mighty city, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is her judgment come. That means it came quickly and decisively, and it came in a way of no repair. Okay, quickly, decisively, without repair. Verse 11, watch this. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandises. Notice the emphasis now that merchandise ends. Commerce ends. Purchasing, buying and selling is over with. That's at the center of their livelihood, economics, okay? They're going, whoa, we can't spend money with her anymore. Her economy has what? Collapsed. Look at the next verse. Verse 12. Now, I want you to mark these next 2 verses. So what the Spirit of God does for us here is it allows us to look at the value systems of the world. This here's the market, okay, of that time. I don't care nothing about this. I don't hardly have any of this, so this don't bother me. The merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones, of pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, of all Thyan wood, that is a high quality wood, and all manners of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble. All of this is necessary to make stately buildings. Do you understand that? Stately buildings. That's what you use to make stately buildings. These are your Congress buildings. This is your White House. These are your stately buildings. For governance. Verse 13, this is what I want you to capture. Please read this carefully with me. This is where I'm going to collapse to the end of my exhortation to you. I want you to catch this now, because this is the wise man wisely considering the house of the wicked. That's what I said in the opening. Y'all with me? This is the wise man wisely considering the house of the wicked. He is completely observing every detail of its status because it's coming down. Here it is. Of cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense, and all of this is used also as well in the temple, a gaudy temple, right? Of wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beast and sheep and horses. What is that all about? That's all about living luxuriously on a dietary level. And chariots. What is that all about? That would be your Mercedes. This would be your Rolls Royces. This would be your Lexuses and all that stuff today. Yeah, your statesmen would have been riding in chariots. Yeah, Vespasian would have been rolling up in chariots, and Titus would have been rolling up in chariots, and Nero. I wish I had time to talk about how Nero would make chariots that were so unique and bizarre. He was crazy. Do you know how you got some people that just make these crazy looking cars? That's what Nero did. Whenever his chariots came down the road, they said, there go Nero again. Nero was crazy. Like Nero would have fit perfectly in the spectrum of our multiple gender identity culture today, because he started that thing. You guys just don't know. He started it. He's swaying all ways, not just both ways, all ways. For sure. Now watch this. And slaves and souls of men. Now I want you to mark what's stated right there. It's not talking about free men. The Babylonian system has no free men. Everyone's a slave. And souls of men. This goes to a deeper dimension, because it's not only slaves in the sense that you are a material product of the state, but your whole eternal being now is owned by them. And the souls of men. Now, this is where I have a note in my outline. And in my outline, I'm saying to myself, now this really will be much more apropos about a year to 2 to 5 from now. Because the goal of technology is not only to confine you geographically, so as to monitor your going hither and yon, and tell you where you can go and can't go, when and when not. But the goal of technology, and I told you about this artificial intelligence, is to get inside your head and control your soul. They've been working at this for a long time already. And they've been practicing. Can I have your attention for a few more minutes? Because I want to show you. They've been practicing through different models and methods. Military does it a lot. PSYOP's been going on for decades. The ability to actually affect how people think from a distance. That science has been around for a long time. Stay with me. And the goal at some point is to be able to do that with the whole world. But before they're able to actually penetrate into your mind and control what you are thinking in the name of, for those of you who want to work this through health, H-E-A-L-T-H, that's the big one, right? In the name of health, because this is called pseudo-religion. This is the Antichrist system. If you're not healthy, they have to get rid of you. Okay? This is what you are under right now with the COVID thing. This here is a test run. Okay? So the idea here is that the Babylonian system will not have men and women who are called free radicals. You know what a free radical is? That's just that thing in your soul, in your body, that says, I ain't going to be subject to none of the laws here. Now, in the Babylonian system, free radicals are Christians. Because free radicals are governed by one law and one lawmaker. And here's the problem with the free radical Christians. Are you ready? Free radical Christians can actually heal the body. So you got to get rid of free radicals, because free radicals can actually heal the body. And we want the whole body toxified. So get rid of the free radicals. Are you hearing me? That's the battle coming down the pipe. Before, we have the balloon test of existential threat, like the virus. This is an existential threat that they can use to propagandize and condition us mentally to succumb to mandates and imperatives. Listen to me. Without you even being able to fully understand why they are telling you what to do. And we're just doing it lock, stock, and barrel. And your government, your politicians whom we put in office, who are obligated to give us every piece of legitimate scientific data and premise and basis for any kind of altering of our constitutional rights, are y'all hearing me? Are just saying we're going to implement it and we're going to see how many people are simply going to be conditioned to kowtow because we're hearing from the Wizard of Oz that comes through the microphone or through the media. And you couldn't defend the whole state of coronavirus for yourself if you wanted to. As a rule, you couldn't defend it. And I said this to us when we first started battling against this up front. I said at the beginning, you guys, this is a battle of freedom. I said it at the beginning. I said, this is a battle of freedom. This is why I couldn't take the position, because I knew what we would be losing to simply listen to the narrative of the media and succumb to it. We would be conditioned now to stay in our houses. We would be conditioned now not to have anybody over. Newsom said, if you're going to make love to your wife, Arthur, you got to put a mask on. Now, I love Sister Holmes. She's, I'm trying to remember her first name. She's the governor of South Dakota. Sister Holmes says, I don't have the authority to tell the people of South Dakota what to do. That's why I didn't shut down. I would only shut down if the people of South Dakota said, shut it down. The people of South Dakota said, no, don't shut it down. We got enough sense to know how to get about and do what we need to do. We'll hang out with who we want to hang out. And when I don't like you, I'll just pull my mask up. That's called freedom. That's called freedom. Right? We don't all like each other. Some people coming to me, I'm doing this. How you doing, man? How you doing? I don't know where you been. So what you are seeing is society being conditioned. And it is minimizing our ability to have good relationships. We're not able to even advance the gospel as much. You guys understand what I'm saying? Right. You were made to be free. And you were made for righteousness. That's what you were made for. Righteousness is life. It's life. Righteousness is life. Right? If you do all these commandments, you shall live. Jesus did it for me. He's my righteousness. I'm alive. Whomsoever the Son shall set free shall be free indeed. If you continue in my words, you will know the truth, and the truth will liberate you over and over and over again. This is where the people of God should be focusing on liberation of the truth that maintains your identity in Christ so you can walk in your freedom, even if you have to buttress up against systems on your job hither and yon. I'm free to do it. Are you understanding? I'm free to do it. The souls of men. Look at verse 13. Pull verse 13 up. I want to show you something there because this is tapping into what we are now. Then I'm just going to make the observation because we need to partake of the table. Revelation chapter 18, verse 13. Verse 13. Sorry. Verse 20. This might be the one. Yeah, verse 23. Verse 23. This here is a cry again of all of the demise of the Babylonian system. There's a word I want you to capture here, and then we're going to unpack it in the future. Listen to the description. There shall no more be a light of a candle to shine in her at all. And the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride shall be heard no more at all. Do you understand the metaphor there? Light means rejoicing. Bride and bridegroom mean family, proliferation, children, and beyond, right? None of that anymore. Watch this. For your merchants were the great men of the earth. For by your sorceries were all the nations deceived. You guys see that? Now your merchants were the great men of the earth. And by your sorceries were all the nations deceived. So I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to tell it to you. And I'm going to close with one imperative that's given in our fourth point. You see the little word there, sorcery? We talked about this 15 years ago. Pharmakia is our Greek term, from which we get the term pharmaceutical. Okay? Pharmaceutical. Now I want you to mark what the Holy Ghost is saying. The world system has always used sorcery and drugs to penetrate into the demonic world and to control the masses of people. And this is where we're going even now. Right. So you should not be surprised that 21st century technology still borrows first century, pre-first century, 5 centuries before, even 1,000 centuries before, policies and politics of the Greco-Roman culture to actually govern and control the masses. All right, we are operating out of an ancient Greco-Roman paradigm of philosophy and government, whether you know it or not. And drugs have always been a way to medicate and control the masses. Right, not only in terms of crisis and sicknesses that we go through, but because we don't know God, we love getting high. We just love getting high. And it is no coincidence that what we're dealing with right now is a mandate that's about to go on around the world of taking that vaccine. Right now, we got to talk that through because there's a bunch of people that got to take it if they're going to maintain their position. My baby's in the military. All military people have to take it. What you need to do is learn what's in it. All right, see, one of the things I like, I make Christians mad at me You know why? Because Christians are too flippant when they say don't do this and don't do that. You don't get to tell people what to do and what not to do until you're able to explain why they shouldn't do it. Don't tell people that. That's not freedom. If you love people, find out particularly and sufficiently what you believe is the problem with why you don't do what you do, and then share it with them and allow them the right to determine it. Listen carefully to me, child of God, and pray for me because I just made somebody mad. Watch this. Hear me now. If people simply do what I tell them, I'm their master and they're my slave. You can't do that to people. You can't do that to people. Pastor can't do that to people. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You get to stone me to death the moment I tell you to do something that's not right, and especially not explain it to you. This is why we need to be doing the memorial right now of Navin Gistand, Diane Feinstein. We should be all at the funeral right now. Long ago, if we was all under the Old Testament, they'd be dead. You do know that, right? We'd be saying, Navin, Nancy, right? They'd all be dead because they get to lie and tell you to do things, and they actually don't even know what's going on themselves. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're kind of laughing, but you don't really understand that this is, in a larger aggregate sense, the laughter of fools. According to Solomon, the laughter of fools is the laughter of ignorant people who are like thorns under the pot that actually fuel the fire for the boiling of the judgment. I remember sharing this with you several months ago when we were back working through the dialectical process, and we were understanding what that intelligence agent who had come over from Russia explained to us, how that the first thing that invasion does is called ideological subversion, is to corrupt the minds of people by massive immorality, get people to practice immorality. That way you corrupt values. You corrupt morals and ethics. Has it worked? Has it worked? Can you tell by what has happened with our election that it's worked? I sit up and I think, how could those people sleep at night when we got cameras on them? We got cameras on. We see them stealing. And then the electorate, I'm watching the electorate, and the leadership in the electorate rising up mad at the witnesses who said, hey, yeah. And the leadership in the electorate are going, they're lying, they're lying. You know, some of us have watched 48 Hours. Have we not watched 48 Hours? Whenever that knucklehead get caught and you pull him in and begin to investigate him, what's the first thing he said? I didn't do it. And then you just hit the camera and say, is that you? Right? What I'm talking about is a lack of integrity. This is a thing that you need to be afraid of. You need to be afraid of a society that can so callously lie. And then on top of that, call itself Christian. I told you this before. See, once that happens, there is no foundation now. You can't adjudicate righteousness with people who would be willing to lie. Because all they're wanting to find out is, do you not have enough power to stop me? Do you understand what I just stated? Do you have enough power to stop me? Okay, I'm going to lie before your face. I know you see me on camera. I know you see what I'm doing. I'm going to lie in front of you, and I dare you to stop me. That's the country I live in. It's a bunch of church folk. For sure. A lot of them church folk. My heart broke. Well, you know how many of those people were just lugging the suitcases in, you know what kind of people they were? Sorry, bunch of black folk. You know what I was saying to myself? We're still in slavery time. It made me go back and think, what were the masters telling slaves to do back then that was wrong? Do you understand what I just stated? For which they would do just to survive. I can get that if I'm a slave in chains, but now we're slaves in our mind because of morality and ethics being corrupted, and we're willing to live a lie. That's what the text is talking about. And that means we have a society set up for sorcery, the pharmacia. Once you are penetrated into your body by the control mechanism, you're at the whim of the next level of technological control. Why would I let somebody stick a needle in me and I don't know what's in the content? Stay with me. The reason I would do it is because I'm not free and I'm not righteous. And I don't realize that my identity is rooted in a God that mandates me know what I'm doing. Now I'm taking this body, which is His, and I'm allowing other people to do something with it that has no aim at God's glory. So you know what God says to us around this idea of the Babylonian system, the Neo-Babylonian system that you and I are presently at? It's point number 3 in your outline as we consider it well, the call to His people by the glory of Christ to come out. Look at it again, Revelation chapter 4, 18 verse 4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people, that you be not partaker of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. The call is to come out. It's the gospel call to come out. It's the call of coming out of Babylon as an authority over your life. It's the call to come out of Babylon as an influence in your life. It's a call to come out of Babylon to the authority and crown rights of Jesus, as Paul was called out, as Peter was called out, as the church of the living God is called the ecclesia, the called out ones. Are you a called out one? You and I are called out of the Babylonian system, and therefore we are called out of subpoint B, a decoupling from the whore. I was intentionally vivid with that because salvation is God extricating you from a fornicating relationship with the world system. And when He saves you and me, He decouples us so that we become a virgin bride, ready for the end of Revelation 18 and the joy of Revelation 19. Rejoice, rejoice, because the bride hath made herself ready for the marriage of the Lamb has come. Rejoice. But that only happens for men and women who have been decoupled from Babylon's harlotries. And it takes the grace of God to decouple you. It takes the grace of God to bring you up out of that mess. It takes the grace of God to free you from the traps and delusions of the Babylonian system. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, Solomon knew it well, didn't he? He says, I find more bitter than death the women whose hands are snares and nets and bands and traps. And he was talking about the harlot system. More bitter than death, the women whose hands are snares and nets and traps. He said, the person that does not please God will not escape. I heard that warning when I was 19 years old. I was thinking carnally back then, Lord, keep me from the hope. Didn't realize I was one. Right? Right. But what does it mean that whosoever does not please God shall be taken by her? It means the man or the woman that does not have faith in Christ. It means the man or the woman who has not experienced the grace of God that's in Christ.
the imputed righteousness of Christ, the imparted righteousness of his Spirit, by which saving faith is produced in the life. Because without what? Without what? Without faith, it's impossible to please God, right? If we have faith in Christ, then it's going to manifest itself by us not at all being drawn into the whore. We're going to love God enough, love Christ enough, be committed as his virgin bride enough to say no, 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 no to this whorish system. We're going to have the Lord's table at this time. Amen. All right, we're going to do the table and then we'll do the offering. Y'all just hold up. Y'all got the elements in your hand? Good. So now, see, that's another thing. Now, so I'm learning how. I'm learning how to count my blessings. Now, here's a real blessing. The brethren don't have to walk around for 10 minutes passing out the elements. Isn't that a blessing? You can keep the element on the side of your chair waiting for this moment, and then we can just go through this moment, right? Isn't that a real blessing? Now, the downside of this blessing. This is just me. I need to stop. I've gotten better after about a month with peeling off the lid. I'm going to have my elders and my deacons to actually see if we can order a high quality content here. Because I'm sure that this is not what the manna tasted like. But I'm going to count my blessings. And I want you to count them too as we prepare to go. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it. And he said, take, eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. Saints, take the bread and eat. And we do it in remembrance of him. Not that the bread does anything for us, but it becomes a visible testimony to others that Jesus is our life. After the same manner, he also took the cup when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are showing the Lord's death till he comes. Take the cup and drink. This cup represents the blood of our Savior. The bread represents his body. The doctrine is the doctrine of the incarnation of the blessed second person of the Godhead. The totality of his person and work is the redemptive expression of God to humanity. Whenever we preach Christ, we are preaching the love of God to the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And when the unbeliever sees you eat the bread and drink the cup, they are reminded that Jesus came into the world, assumed a human nature, lived a perfect life, died a perfect death, rose again from the dead, bore a record to 500 brethren, ascended on high, and is seated at the right hand of God Almighty right now, who rules over the world for the good of his people and rules in the hearts of his people by the word of God and by the power of the Spirit of God. And one day, the Lord Jesus is coming back again. He gonna bust the silence, break the barrier, open the heavens, and what we declare by faith to the world, everybody gonna see one day that we were telling the truth. That we were telling the truth.